history book.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we'll start.
And this is something you can keep. It's got a list of all my missions.
Okay.
And
Well,
where
so
I
we know
went.
who we're talking to.
Yeah,
I'll
right.
introduce myself. I'm Kim Hobbs, and my father was a pilot in the 513th, and
Yeah.
I'm talking to, this is the 7th of December, 2007. And what is your full name, sir?
William G. Dunn, Bill Dunn, known,
What's the G stand for?
Gibson,
Gibson.
William
Okay.
Gibson Dunn. I was named under my grandfather, great-grandfather, who was William Gibson Brown, who was born in Indiana. I can't remember the name of the town. Well, it's some immaterial, really.
Well, when were you born?
I was born in 1921, October 18th, 1921.
Okay.
And
What,
so
in
that
what
makes me almost 86, yeah.
What town were you born in?
I was born in San Francisco. My father was born in San Francisco. My grandfather was born in San Francisco. And my great-grandfather was born in New York City, but he went around the Horn in 1849 and 50, and arrived in Monterey in January of 1850. Spent a couple of days there, and then went into San Francisco. Spent the rest of his life there out of San Francisco, although he did a lot of things. He was, then in 54, he went back to New York City, and he got married. And then they came back. This time he went across the peninsula and up to San Francisco. And he was on the same boat as Leland Stanford and his wife. And because he was a very sophisticated family and well educated, why my great-grandfather was a very great friend, became very well acquainted with Leland Stanford and got appointments. I think he was a port commissioner for San Francisco for a while, and so it pays to know the high and mighty, because Stanford was the governor of California too, so. But anyway, that's the thing.
Well, what squadron were you in, Bill?
I was in the 514th Squadron, and I arrived on the base on the 18th of August in 1944.
Now, which base was this?
Pardon?
Which base did you arrive at? This, you're talking about overseas?
Overseas. And when
Okay.
I arrived at the 376 Bomb Group,
Which was at?
which is at San Pancracio,
Okay.
yeah. And that was on the 18th of August of 1944.
Okay.
And I flew my first mission, I don't know, I've got it down there, which was my first mission.
Let's see. Hungary, 28th of August, 44?
Yeah, 28th of August of 44.
There you go.
And I flew 50 missions, 33 sorties. Did anybody ever describe the difference between a sortie and a mission?
No, please do that.
A sortie is when you take off, go to a target, and come back. That's a sortie.
Okay.
A mission was the fact that those that were long and difficult, you got double credit for.
Okay.
So then, when you were ready to qualify for leaving, you had you could do it either by 35 sorties
Okay.
or 50 missions.
Okay.
And I had 50 missions and 33 sorties, so that means I had 17 doubles.
Okay. So an extremely long sortie or an extremely difficult?
Yeah, that was like going to Vienna or Budapest or Bratislava, Czechoslovakia, or Munich. All those long, tough missions there. And I went to Vienna 11 times.
Well, which one was your toughest target that you remember?
Vienna.
Vienna.
Yeah, it was a tough one. See, many of them were the Moose Bear Bomb Oil Refinery, which I'll talk about later. Moose Bear Bomb Oil factory is on the Danube, and I'll show you the picture of it, a bomb strike photo of it, which I'll explain later.
Now, what city was it close to?
It was actually east of Vienna, and I considered it Vienna. It was about 20 miles, 30 miles east.
If Vienna was your worst, was it the worst
Yeah.
because of flak or because of fighters?
Everything. That was after the fall of Ploesti. Vienna was the toughest target.
Okay.
Let's see,
Was there
this-
anything that you considered a milk run?
Oh yeah. Well, there were many of them that went to Yugoslavia, and which they had no. Let's see. That's the smashing. And this is Moose Beer Bomb. This is Moose Beer Bomb Oil Refinery. It's Belmstrike model.
Okay.
And this is the Danube River, and this is the refinery. And you see, they bring the barges with crude oil up here from Ploesti in Romania, and then they'd pump it, and you can see where the pipelines go right through into the refinery. And when we were briefed for it in February, they said that 55% of all the aviation fuel available to Germany came from Moose Beer Bomb. And that, of course, is why
That's
it was
why.
a prime target. And we were literally grounding the Air Force. The German, in fact, that was one of the major factors. It just wiped out the effectiveness of the German Air Force, because first they didn't have enough fuel, and secondly, they couldn't even train pilots and give them much time, because they couldn't waste gasoline on training new pilots, and that led them downhill spiral, as far as the Air Force is concerned.
And you made 3 runs over Vienna.
I made 11 runs.
11.
11, yeah, of which I'm only, I think 4 or 5 of them were to Moose Beer Bomb, which I considered, let's see.
Was there any targets that you were less than anxious to go after, like Vienna? Did you go after
Yeah, all
Pulaski?
of those major, like Budapest, and they had a lot of guns. Budapest, and one of them was not Kraljevo, it was Bratislava, Czechoslovakia, and that had an oil refinery there. And Vienna had 2 oil refineries, and they had the Hermann Goering Tank Works there, and they had a lot of targets around Vienna that we attacked.
Were you ever wounded?
The only thing I ever got in, I got my foot frozen. And as you know, the temperature up there got to 40, 50, 60 below zero, Interesting enough, when you get to that elevation there, and of course, I put on loads of clothes. Some of them put light clothes because they didn't want to be burdened, but I figured, hey, I may have to walk home and so I carried a lot of clothes. I would wear my underwear, and then I got some of these basketball suits, that were from ankle to sweatsuits, and I had that, and then I put on my winter flying suit, or winter clothes, winter uniform.
Was that like a fleece-lined uniform?
No, this was just regular cotton, heavy winter clothes,
Okay.
And then on top of that, then I had my let's see, what do you call it? It's zippered all the way up in here, and it's I don't know remember what you'd call it, but it was
Like a jumpsuit?
it's like a jumpsuit. Yeah, I think that's probably where it was, and that on top of all this, and then I had my heated flying suit on top of that. No, let me see. I had a heated jacket, which goes from, I guess it actually went all the way down, and then you had shoes, which were also electrically heated, And so everything on here was, and then this was a ideal one because it had extra heavy lining to it, so it made it, kept the heat in. And so then of course, then you put on, and I was getting bigger and bigger and bigger, but I did it, and some people say, oh, I can't handle that stuff. And I said, yeah, but you get shot down and walk home through the snow for 500 miles, and you'll wish you had something because there's no heat, no electric power down there to shoot your, to heat your electric flying suit. And
Well, how did you get one of your, how did you freeze your foot?
well, apparently my boot, my electric boot, was not working right, and I think it was my left foot, and it went out, and I tell you, that was the most pain I've ever felt, because we're up at 50, 60 below zero up there, and being navigator, I didn't dare go in it. You see, we don't have it in the lower area where the bombardier and navigator are. There's no heat in there at all, and that's as opposed to the pilot area where in the upper area they do have a heating up there, but we didn't have anything down. It was that cold, and apparently my boot wasn't working, and so it started freezing up on me, and boy, it hurt like hell, but I couldn't go anywhere because, I had to keep the log and keep going with it in case we had to go back or return, I just can't just stop doing anything, I had to do what I had to do, and that was keep going to my log and making sure we knew where we were and were ready to go home if we had to. And so it was really hurt, and I waited until after we passed the drop, got away from the target, which I felt then we were not likely to get any damage, or we have to go home alone. And so then I packed up my stuff and went up to the pilot's area where it was warm, and it went away, But boy, I tell you that, I probably went 30 minutes or 40 minutes, maybe an hour, in intense cold. And boy, I tell you, that hurt, But and then I forgot about it when I got home, back to the base. And I think it was a few days later when I went down to get a shower at the base, I turned around and here was a dead spot the size of $1 on the back of my foot. It was frostbite I had, so fortunately it didn't infect or anything else. And I was thinking of going in and applying for a Purple Heart. And I says, gosh, I'd hate to get a Purple Heart for something like this and then get a oak leaf cluster or having my head shot off. I mean, and so I never did report it or anything, although I understand that for some reason or other they wouldn't give you a Purple Heart for even on the ground forces or anything for frostbite. Which is surprising because, it was just comes with the combat, Like in Korea, they had a terrible time with these pilots or ground going in intense cold and freezing, and they had a lot of, but anyway, they didn't, so
Did you ever have a close call of getting the plane getting shot up or thinking that you might
Well,
go down?
the one thing that was probably the most amazing was in the mission. Now, half my missions I flew as bombardier and navigator, because if you were not lead, why all you had to do was to watch the lead ship when they dropped the bombs and toggle them. You see, and so when I was flying as a bombardier as well as navigator, why they had the bubble, on the side of the plane there, and I would stick my head in that bubble and watch the lead ship so that I could toggle the bombs when their bombs started to drop. And that's what I normally did, but in this particular mission, I think it was to Vienna or somewhere, but anyway, it was, they were on radar, it was all undercast, and they, so they had to bomb by radar, you know. And so anyway, why, it turned out the radar went out on the lead ship in our box. So they decided that they were going to watch the box ahead of them and try to time, so that when they dropped their bombs, figure just how much time, maybe 50 seconds or a minute and a half or something like that, would be right to drop the bombs, you know, and take advantage of their radar. And so as a result, I was back here so I could watch my box lead plane to see if it dropped its bombs, and also I could look ahead and see the box ahead of us, so I could see when they dropped their bombs. So if for some reason or other the lead ship in our box didn't drop them soon enough, I would do it myself, you know. And so I was up there, and after the mission was over, I heard this funny flit, 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 flit noise. And I looked down, and here was a hole about that big in the bubble. I'd had my head in it if it hadn't been for the change in the way I dealt. It would have gone right through my head. And I guess that was the closest you can say I'd been, you know. But anyway, that was quite an experience. And let me see what else. Oh yeah, I was going to say here how many times. See, I considered Moose Birnbaum as being the same as Vienna, even though it wasn't actually. It was like 20 miles away, but it was heavily dependent, obviously.
Which bothered you the most, the flak or the fighters?
Well, I never saw a fighter. What I did one time, I saw one of their jet fighters, but it was like 10 miles away, I think, and fooling around in there. But otherwise, I never saw it, because by the time I got in there, they had pretty well decimated between the 8th Air Force and the 15th Air Force. And everybody else out there, you know, they'd pretty well wiped out the German fighter force. And in fact, I understand they had only about a few hundred, 200 or 300 fighters by then, and they would use them to attack whoever they wanted, you know, and try to conserve their fuel and that. But effectively, they were not as serious. So the flak was a big thing, and of course, the Germans realized that too, whereas when they had a good fighter force that was available, why they could hit you both ways, you know, but they didn't spend that much time on the ground. But by the time I got there, why they lost their air force and they started concentrating on their ground formation, the anti-aircraft systems, and they were very good at it, you know. I mean. And you go up there and they say that if you hear the explosion, you know, because they would fly up and then explode, you know, and send flak around. They say if you could hear them, why, they were close enough to hit you. And I remember in times that I was over Vienna, you hear boom, 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 boom every second. So there was a lot of them really close, and it was weird because I don't think any other branch of the service of the Air Force had the situation we were faced with, because you know we're flying tight formation, and everybody's concentrating how close, and we flew very tight formations in the 376. And the reason we did have such tight formations is because the 376 flew half of their missions were out of North Africa. And they didn't, and of course in those days, let's see, October 43 is when they moved to Italy. But at that time they were out there and they didn't have a fighter escort, and they had few planes, and these guys were going out with 20 planes, 20 bombers, and the whole doggone German Air Force is out there to go after them, and so they really had a tough time. And But then when I got over there, why then the Germans realized that they were lost for the war as far as their fighters are concerned. Why then they would work hard to get their flak installations to do ground, try to compensate by putting in heavy ground for. In fact, one of the interesting things about those flak deals was, when I'm going into the target, and that's right, I say, because we were going in straight, tight formation, and the reason we were in tight formation is because we actually overlapped our wings. And actually, when we were getting into formation and ready to depart on a mission, the group commander or group operations officer or some high-ranking guy was up there, and we had a B-25 and we had a couple of P-40s which was picked up along the way in North Africa, and they would circle around and look down, get in there, it's hey number so you get into the target, come on buddy, chuck it in, and he'd force us to fly tight, and the bonus was that the rest of them were like this, and heck, the fighters could pick them out in one by one, and they're very vulnerable. When they'd come and see our formation, they'd say, forget it, we're not going after that. In fact, one of the things that happened, I think it was in October, why Axis Sally called up and said, hey, you guys in the 376, you haven't been hit pretty hard. You've had it pretty easy. Well, we got a real surprise for you. But it never happened. And I'm sure that what happened, what you're talking about, they're concentrating the fighters and going after us. But the fighter guys get up there and they look down, and we're flying a tight formation, which means you got 20, 30 guns. It's off a small area, and the rest of them are spread all. They say, the hell with fighting that, we don't want to, and they go to mother. So we wouldn't even see the fighters even if they were up there, And I think that was one of the reasons why. But the reason we flew tight formations is because in those early days in North Africa, they didn't have an escort, and we had to maximize our firepower to try to compete with the fighter attacks.
And some of the other groups that you flew with, when the 98th and the 450th?
No, the 98th was the same. The 98th and 376 bomb groups were together. They both came, the 98th came over in October of 42. And we came over in May of 42. And I don't know, did anybody tell you about why we were in North Africa?
No, go ahead.
They didn't? It's fascinating because they took a 19-plane group headed by a Colonel
Halverson?
Halverson, yeah. And they called them the Halpros. And this 19-plane group went over and ended up in Cairo, Egypt. And they were actually, their actual orders were that they were to continue around through India and go into China. And this was in May and June of 42, 6 months after the war started, just a few months after Doolittle's raid with B-25s, and to go to a China air base and then bomb Tokyo. And when we were in Cairo, they decided to go on a practice run to Ploesti just to get the feel of flying formation and all that. Well, they didn't, they flew out of Cairo on that deal, and they got out there and it was all under CAS, and so they didn't know where Ploesti was. And they just dropped their bombs, so that we were really the first American bombers to drop bombs on Europe on that raid. That was June 6th or 7th of 1942. And so anyway, as a result of that being in that raid, some of the planes couldn't get back and they had mechanical troubles, and so 4 of them went to Turkey and landed in Turkish air bases, and they were interned in Turkey. And that's a hell of a story too, because those guys eventually escaped, but they got out there. But anyway, they got there, and then of course Turkey sent out a notice that they had just interned 4 American bombers and the crews that were on a mission of some sort, and the War Department didn't say a word about it, because they didn't want to admit that they had long-range bombers halfway around the world towards Japan, you know. Mm-hmm. And that was a very interesting little deal about our first beginning. So then when and then about the time they were still debating or waiting for orders from Cairo, why then the word came in that the Japanese had overtaken that base that we were supposed to go in for refueling. And so they gave up that whole idea. It was never mentioned or something. But anyway, that was an interesting thing about the history of the bomb group. But then that unit, I think they had a new legal description of what that group was after they canceled the mission to China. Why then they flew north missions out of North Africa, just this group, you know. And I think they're called the 100th. I think it's written up in the bomb group deal of what they call it. But anyway, a special unit. And then in October of '42, why the 98th Bomb Group came overseas, and they brought others over, and they made up the 98th and the 376, and then that was beginning, and at the same time it made it the 9th Air Force. Mm-hmm. So this was and I think they had a B-25 outfit with it too. I'm not sure of the rest of it, but then, and so our group flew as the 9th Air Force out of North Africa in various places along north from Cairo to Tunisia. And then in October of '43, a year later, why they formed the 12th Air Force. Mm-hmm. And so our group was in the 98th, and what was in the 9th was turned into the 12th Air Force, and that lasted for 2 weeks. And this is also documented in there. And then they decided to form the 15th Air Force, and so then they changed it to the 15th Air Force, and that was General Doolittle was their commanding officer of that, and that was until January, and then I don't know who the other Doolittle went up to take over the 8th Air Force, and I don't know, Colonel Spots or somebody became commander of the 15th. So that was the history of the whole thing. But actually, the net result is that our outfit flew more missions and more time, because we were flying out of North Africa for a long time, and long before they even had these other outfits, you know. So and we had more missions than any other, and it was quite an interesting deal.
Do you remember your squadron commander?
My squadron commander, when I went in, it was Major. Darn it, what was his name? He was a captain, Robinson, and he was a squadron commander.
Who was the group commander at that time?
Well, before he was the. Wait, no, actually, that's right, the group commander. Yeah, I'm thinking of the squadron, 514 Squadron, yeah. No, I'm not that familiar. It's explained in our bomb group history book.
But do you have any memories of the squadron commander or the group commander? Did you ever talk to them?
Well, Colonel Graff, I remember him very well. In fact, I met him after the war when I was at Hamilton Air Force Base one time. And he comes in with his big old mustache, and so I had a chance to chat with him, you know. And actually, though, Colonel Graff, let's see, he was there. He was a commander for quite a long time. And then he went on leave. They gave him a rest leave for a couple of 3 months and sent him back to the States. And then they had another person was then the group commander at the time I was there for much of
Fellows?
the time. Fellows, yeah. Ted Fellows, yeah.
Do you remember him as being fair, or do you, like I said, you?
Oh, I didn't have much contact with
Okay.
that level, yeah.
Was there a lot of discipline or regulations when you
Well,
were over there? Or were
no,
things
that's
pretty-
something that was interesting about our outfit was we were so relaxed. You didn't know who was an officer and who was an enlisted man. They all ran around and they never put their bars on. Nobody cared. We had a rapport with our enlisted men that in the ordinary army they said, no, you can't do that. You know, they're so highly stratified and everybody salute. That was out the door. You know, and I was there until our squadron was first was one for a long time was Apfel, Colonel Apfel.
Norman
Apfel, yeah, and he was Apfel, and I think he'd gotten too much flying. He was doing some crazy stuff, and I think they'd sent him home to rest. And then Captain Robinson took over our squadron then, and he was only a captain at that time. And then he got his majority in there. And I remember we had our squadron headquarters, a little tufi hut, which tufi is a stone, a soft stone that they would cut out and quarry into blocks, and then use it for building things in there. So we had our squadron headquarters was just a little tufi building there, you know, 2 or 3 rooms, and they had an antenna for their radio contact, and it was on about 18 inches high off of the top of the building and extending along there. And Colonel Robinson got a hanker one time, and he decided he was going to buzz him. He came by and he got so low his tail skid picked up that antenna and took it along with him. And guess who had to put it out? They made the colonel or major, or squadron commander, get up by himself and replace that damn antenna. That's how relaxed we were. Where else would it happen, you know, like that? And
Were you pretty close with the whole crew, or did you just have your
oh
certain...
no, we were all close. Yeah, we were like family. We just depended, you know. In my case, of my crew, my original crew was Liv Hicks was the pilot, and then we had 9 other guys, you know, 9 people for it, plus myself, to 10-man crew, and we went to Davis Monthan Field and did our combat crew training. We were there, I guess, a couple of months, and flying, practicing missions and formations, and getting the feel of being a crew, you know.
Was any crew member your favorite? Or were you closer to anyone?
My bombardier, Don Beck, he was a hell of a guy. He was a little bit nuts. Some of us were anyway. But
were there any nicknames on the crew members?
No, I don't know. I've got pictures of the boys' crew. Well, this is the boys' crew, and several pictures. I didn't bring the pictures of my Hicks crew, but we were very close, and the crew members were over. The enlisted men were frequently over at our tent, and also the boys' crew. They were always over there harassing around the officers, and you know, and we didn't care. We were all all the same rank as far as we were concerned, you know. And
After the war, did you stay in touch with any of them?
well, I lost my first crew, the one that I trained with, and they went down. What was that? That was the December. It was to November, December. December 6th, and there's a mission to Szombathely, Hungary. That's what I was telling you about, the time we almost got killed and split the, and that's when Hicks' crew, my original crew, went down and they crashed on that deal. And so that was the 6th of December. And of course what happened, I was still living with my officers from my original group, Hicks and Fay and Beck, the bombardier and everything. And so when I got back from that mission, they were gone. And I never knew what happened. It took me, I don't know, let's see, 14 years before I found out what happened, and I got in contact with my bombardier's widow, and she showed me papers, and I could put the whole thing together as to what happened. But the net result was, of the 9 guys that I flew with and trained with and went overseas with, 6 of them were killed, and 3 of them were prisoners of war. And the pilot and co-pilot and radio operator were saved. The rest of them didn't have a chance because of the way it dove in the ground. And I have a write-up on that mission, which are called Miracle at Maribor, and you can take that and go from there on that thing. And no, we were very close. It was a bad month for me, because after the 6th of December, I'm sitting looking at empty bunks and wondering what happened to them, and I didn't bother to work well, I didn't want to, I was really, but I still flew missions. I flew on the 11th of December, and the 15th of December, and the 17th of December, and the 19th of December, and 26th of December, so I really was flying my missions, but basically I was pretty much, what do you say, depressed about it, you know, but I still went on and did my job, you know. And
Did you get close to the second crew?
yes, we did. We worked very close, and this is the Boyce crew. We ended up, after I lost my, after I only flew 3 missions with the Hicks crew, the one I went over with, and then I was transferred to the Boyce crew. And you can see here are pictures of them. Yeah, like this one, and this one, and these guys, they were always over to our tent. And here's a Tazak and me, and they were good friends. Some of them were more commonly with us, but anyway, no, I came pretty close to that crew, but actually I have met with one person who was our radio operator, and he went on. Creasa was from Minneapolis, and he was my bombardier with the Boyce crew, and he was a good guy. And he was from Minneapolis, and I went to see him trying to run down where he was. I found his address, and I went to the place, and apparently his folks were renting it, and I never did find him. And there was some gal named Creasa in Minneapolis, and I got a hold of her and talked to her, and she said, well, she didn't know, but she thought her father had a few previous family, you know, and that was about the size of it. So she didn't know anything at all about Bob, and so I had bad luck, and of course, I had a funny thing happen. I must have had a sense of denial about meeting any of the members of the crew after the war. And I just couldn't bring myself around, even decades later, to go in and see him. Like I went to, one of my top gunner. His name was, Mike, he's right here. Here he is. Now that's the Boyce crew.
When did you find this reunion group?
Pardon?
When did you find this 376 reunion group?
I found out about it in the 80s, I think it was, when I first heard about it. No, these are all Boyce crews.
Have you been coming on a regular basis since you
Oh,
found
yeah.
it?
Yeah, I had. I was able to work it out. My daughter, my oldest daughter, was working for National Semiconductor, and she was top executive and doing very well, making a lot of money. And but then she was, for one of her jobs for a while, was in charge of all the shipping. National had branches in Singapore, in the Philippines, in Malaysia, and in Maine, and in the United States in Santa Clara, and then had one in Scotland and London and Germany. And she was responsible for all the materials, parts and things and things that were shipped from here to there. And it was through FedEx. And her shipping bill was $80 million a year. So, in fact, she had an office in Memphis, Tennessee, and she would go there for a few days or a week from time to time to just keep them on the ball as to what she needed, what they had to do. And so anyway, so she was picking, and she flew to the southeast and all over. One time she flew all the way around the world. She went to Singapore and did some things in Malaysia and Philippines, and then flew on to Scotland and London, and then came on, and so she actually went around the world. So she had stacks and stacks of extra miles, that she accumulated. So.
And she found this group?
No, she didn't get in on it, never. But so she would give me mileage for flying there too, and that worked out very well. And now then, since she'd retired, why then my son, her job later didn't do that much traveling, and so but my son, he works now for a big corporation in Minneapolis, and he's a director now actually, and he's responsible for a bunch of plants making farming machinery all over the world. They have 6 plants in Italy, and that's how these pictures I had of Italy have the base, because Rich was one of his clients in there was in Lecce, which is only 10 miles away.
From the base at San
From the base, and so when he got down there here last year, why he took time off and went to San Pancracio, and he says, "Where's the base?" And they said, "Oh, it's here and there." And so he went over and he took a whole bunch of pictures, and that's what some of these pictures are about that he took of. That's not it. It's anyway.
Well, do you feel like you're still in denial, or is coming?
Well, yeah, it was funny now. When I went in '58, I made a trip, and I did go to Arizona, where I met the widow of my bombardier, and I did spend time with her, and talking about it. But then I went down to, at the same time, to New Orleans, Louisiana, and my radio operator lived in Louisiana, and they said, well, why don't you go look them up? And I don't know, I seem to run into a sense of I really don't want to, I could bring back bad memories, and then in 1976, I went on what they call a bicentennial trip with my neighbor and my second wife, and we went to Boston, and my top gunner, Mike Doherty, lived in Maine, Southburg, Maine. His family was there. Of course, he was killed. And I was tempted, I would like to see his folks. And one reason especially because, my whole crew are buried in Louisville, Kentucky. And they're in a mass grave because it took them, even though the accident happened in 1944, they didn't get them interred until 49. So they were just a bunch of bones and things. And of course, there's thousands of planes going down all over the whole Europe, and they would pick them up and check them out and try to find who was there, But actually, there's only 5 people are listed in the grave in Louisville, Kentucky. And Mike Doherty, who was the top gunner, and the nose gunner, and the navigator taking my place, and they were killed. Mm-hmm. But I don't know whether they ever identified. They may still be MIA, Mm-hmm. And I remember I went to Louisville, and I talked to them about finding out more information on them, and I got it all, and I just never got around to writing it, it seemed to run into a sort of, I don't know what you call.
Just a wall you can't pass through.
Just didn't want to do it, And, Mike Doherty, it was an interesting thing about Mike Doherty. When we, on our way overseas, we stopped at, what's the town in New Hampshire? Anyway, we stopped on the way overseas. We went from Topeka, Kansas to, darn it, what was that name of the town? I can't remember it right now. But anyway, it was, we were there and we got overseas, and our plane was a lemon of the first order. Everything was going wrong with that dang plane. We had a page and a half on our Form 1 of all the things that were wrong every single time. And it took us 42 days to get overseas. That was a lemon if they ever had it. And every time we get it, we spent 15 days at Rome, New York, supposedly fixed them all. And we got to New Hampshire, Grenier Field, New Hampshire. We got there, and all the things that were wrong and they were supposed to have fixed was still wrong. And anyway, we got to Grenier Field, New Hampshire, and it seems that the down latch lock of the nose wheel door was improperly heated on a certain string of B-24s. And so the notice went out, in that string of B-24s that came in, they had to replace that, before they had until they had a 100-hour checkup. And so we were grounded in Grenier Field, New Hampshire, and for 15 days waiting for that part, and it never came up. I think there was like 20 B-24s sitting in Grenier Field, New Hampshire, ready to go overseas, and they couldn't go because that down latch lock was, and so we spent all that time there. Well, after we'd been there about a couple of days, Mike Doherty, my top gunner, came to me and says, Lieutenant Dunn, he says, you know, he says, my family lives in South Berwick, Maine, and that's only 70 miles from here. And he said, I've been in the Army for 2.5 years, and I've never gotten home. I'd like to go to see him, you know? And I says, okay, Mike, I tell you, I'll take you. And knowing that as an officer, they couldn't do it, they wouldn't go for Mike, you know. But they couldn't do anything to me because we're overseas and I'm the navigator and it'd be a whole crew grounded, you know, and a plane. And so I just said, I'll take you down there. So I went down there with him, and we met his family and everything else. I said I wanted to meet his family. And so I could attest that I went there and met him and thought they're really high-class people and really worthwhile. And so I could, if they wanted to object to me doing that. So then I went back home, you know, or back to the base. And interestingly enough, after we'd been there about 15 days, we were on, if it was 3 days before you were ready to ship, you could go, you know, but then as soon as there was a date set for your time to leave, then you couldn't go anywhere, you know. So here comes Mike, and we're ready to go, and Mike comes up to me and he says, Lieutenant Dunn, he says, I got a problem. And he says, you know, I've been going there all the time, back and forth, every day, and having a great time with my family. And he says, I finally, since we've been on the road for almost a month already, and our clothes are dirty, and he says, I took all my clothes down there and put it in to be laundered, and I've got the family car, and here we are on the base and can't go anywhere. And he said, what do we do? And I said, well, we'll just have to face up and see what we can do. And so I went to the on the old base. He was an intelligence, I guess, you know, on the base, and he was a captain, and he hated second lieutenants because we made as much money as a captain did with our 50% flight pay. And so I went up there and I told him, and he says, yeah. He said, I don't understand you guys. He says, you know, every time they would when we were free to go in town, they'd only let 3 members of the crew go in town. And he says, every night, they would go, only 2 of them, and Mike would be going. He said, so he got off every single night all that time. And so they were forbidden to go more than 50 miles off the base, which was a violation there. And he said, but you know, he was good. He always got back in. He never had a problem and all that. But he didn't understand how come they let Mike have every doggone day. I said, you don't understand the family that we have, the feeling for these people, you know. And so anyway, the net result was I went to this guy in intelligence or whatever his job was, and told him what happened, and he says, yeah, he says, we know he went, I don't understand how come he can get off every day. And says, you don't understand family, you know, our crew, how we feel about each other. And so finally, after a lot of discussion and such, it says, well, okay, I guess you can go, but you got to have an officer go with you. And I said, I'll take him. And so I did. We went back and met his family, and of course, Mike said how I had saved him. And he was so scared. He was sitting outside when I was in there talking to this officer, and he wondered what was going to happen to me. And well, I knew nothing happened to me because they didn't dare, because the crew and a plane would be grounded, you know. But if it was Mike, but they couldn't blame Mike because I was taking the responsibility. But anyway, so I met Mike's family, and they were all, Mike would tell them what I'd done, and all. I went in and argued with this guy and took it on and arranged. So, and I think really one reason I got off the crew is I think my pilot Hicks, the pilot we were with, may have found out about how I had taken care of Mike,
Yeah.
because he felt, oh, I'm the captain of this crew. I'm the head of it. He shouldn't have gone to the navigator or, or anybody else. But he felt comfortable coming to me. And Hicks was a heck of a nice guy and a good officer, but he was very egotistical, and they didn't feel free going to him, and that's the reason they come to me. So then when I'm making this trip in '76, to and was close enough to go there, and my wife says, "Well, why did you go?" And he says, "Oh, and I knew his family, and I never did, so it is an interesting thing how I'm in denial about really doing these things, and I don't know. I guess it's something that you live with, But
Well, you still think about it because you're sharing it with us.
Yeah, and I've written several articles here about things, and I wanted to share these with you. One of them here.
If you had something to share with, if
Others, yeah.
yeah, what's your main point from your experience of the 376? The pride you have for the group, or the
Oh, the pride, yeah. I mean, that was unquestionably the most remarkable group. We flew more missions than any other group. 2, 3. I guess it's just 3 pages here. This is a memorandum on this particular mission that I went on the 19th of December. Where is it? 19th of December. January. Here it is. It was 19th November. Oh, here it is. December 19th, yeah, in Villach. It was Villach, Austria. The mission was actually to Rosenheim, Germany. And Rosenheim, Germany was about 40 miles south of Munich, and it was a railroad deal in there. And we had went on this mission. I was the lead navigator on Box C. There were 3 boxes. 2 of them was 6 planes, or 1 was 6, and the other 2 was 7 planes, 20 planes altogether. And so we got over the target, and it was all, Rosenheim was all completely covered over, and they were dependent on the radar to bomb or whatever. And the radar went out on the lead ship with Colonel Snyder. Well, he ended up a colonel, but he was then a major, and he was the mission lead, and so he turned it over to my box to take over the lead. And so he says, "You're on. You go. We'll follow you," because we had radar, And so I took off, and then it was my job to.
I'm out of battery. Running out of battery here.
Are you running out of battery? This is the original log, Rosenheim, and I have copies of it, which I'll give you a copy of it.
Well, if you had something to say, Bill, would you speak to your crew members that flew with you, or would you speak to this generation and just tell them to remember?
Excuse me, what?
What message would you give to pass on to who's watching this tape?
Well, I don't know. Ours was, I think the message was that we had a very weird situation that we were flying, and never before here we were flying in tight formation, and so we couldn't do evasive action when somebody comes in to fight, you know, like a B-25 or B-24. The rest of them, they just zoom around. Makes it very exciting. We just go along and target, you know, in tight formation, and we're going in the target while we're zeroed. The bombardier leads in charge. He's running the plane, and he just goes. He can't do evasive act. We just run on in, and Germans can look up. Oh, we know where they're going, and they just keep shooting at you and see if they can hit you. And when we go right over the target, nowadays they're 20 miles and they send a rocket over or something, you know, and nowhere near the exposure deal, you know, and so it was weird, you know, sort of. You're just a sitting duck up there, and especially when you go over these heavily defended targets. And the fact is that the Germans, by the time I got there, they really started ratcheting up their capability of ground fire. And an interesting thing that I ran into in one case was, you know, one of my jobs as navigator was to look out for things of interest, potential targets, note where the bombs went off and when then they were dropped and where they hit and whether they had any damage and any other comments on anything else. And so we were on this mission to Vienna on one time. This was, I don't know, it might have been December or something like that. And I'm down there looking down to see where the bombs went off. And I was looking down there, and I saw this one area there was about the size of Treasure Island, a pretty good sized area, and here these flashes. First I thought there were our bombs going off, and then I realized it was guns actually. And I mean, it was like this. There must have been hundreds of guns, because these are 6 and 8 inch guns that you don't load it. You can maybe one a minute, you know, you can load them and put them in and start shooting. And so there must have been in this little area a couple 300 guns in there, you know, all shooting at us. And we're going right over the top of them. And the weird thing about it is my bombardier in that day was, and I'll not name him but he was one of these rare cases that absolutely scared to death. And when he'd go on the mission, he'd get flak suits and he'd pack around, and they never let him on a mission because they knew he wasn't capable of doing it, because he was so scared. And he put helmets on and flak suits and just bury himself and peek out there so he could toggle the bombs, you know. And so I had just spotted this thing, and I wanted him to confirm what I saw and what I was looking at and what he saw. And I says, hey, wait, take a look, come on, what do you see? Look at that there. And he went and looked at it. God, them's guns and they're shooting at us. and I mean, it was some. So I went back to the base, and we got the base, and I went down to intelligence headquarters, and we looked down there, and here was this area, and my bombardier, he confirmed it, that was it. And he says, oh, no, that's a housing development. And then, oh no, them's guns there, and a lot of them. And they checked it out, and that was what happened. It was houses, all right. Mm-hmm. But when the bombers would go over, the roofs would open up, and there's a gun in there. Mm-hmm. And then they had a whole hundreds of them in there, and we were going right over the top of it. So, of course, what we did later is we went somewhere else, you know. Mm-hmm. And then of course then the roofs would go back, and when the P-38s would go over taking pictures, you know, they see nothing but a bunch of houses down there. It's an interesting thing, and how But that was one of my jobs, was doing that. Anywho,
Well, we thank you for your service, sir.
well, I got several other things here. Let me see, give you this thing. This is a story.
I'm out of tape.
You're out of tape, yeah. Oh, well, we want to go for it
Oh, we'll
later?
still give them we
Oh.
can still give them your story.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
yeah.
We just, well, we can't,
You
they can't scan it.
Can't scan it,
And be able
yeah.
to read it. They'll
Yeah.
take it back.
Yeah, well, I'll leave you the
Sure.
copies of this so you can scan it anytime you want.
That'll be fine.
And but let me see what I got here. This is about,
We'll make copies of any or all of your materials that you want to donate,
oh yeah, I made copies of them for you.
but you run out of tape.
Because this one, let's see, memorandums.
Yeah, they put an extra 6 minutes on these tapes, and we went to 66 minutes.
Oh, boy, I'm giving you a lot of, let's see, this is 1, 2, 3 pages.
Yeah, if you got anything on Pulaski, I'd like to look at it myself.
Yeah, I didn't go to Pulaski.
Was that already knocked out by the time you got?
Yeah, they had, in fact, when I got overseas on the 18th of August, that was the last day of the last Pulaski raid. So I wasn't really unhappy about that. It was the toughest target in all of Europe.
If you don't mind, let me reach in here. I'll get this microphone off of
Oh,
you. So we
okay.
don't lasso you in.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's when out your time, what went out?
Tape and battery. Battery was flashing about 10 minutes ago, and then,
So you can't record.
no,
We can make copies.
Yeah, we can make copies of
Yeah,
that.
copies of this thing. And
If they get another tape, then they can scan it.
Yeah.